remember back with me. Uh, this phase is probably somewhere in your teenage years or maybe young adult years, somewhere in there. Remember back with me when you just always wanted to seem more grown up. At least if you're like me, especially when you're a teenager, you wanted to hang out with the adults quite often because you wanted to seem more grown up. And there's an awkward phase in there of wanting that, but still actually being a child. There's that phase there. And there's this battle within you as you're developing, and you're like, I still want to have fun like a kid, but I want to be respected like a grown-up. And there's a tension there. One of those attributes that comes with being older or seeming older is we associate wisdom with age. Whether or not that's true, I hope it is. Hopefully age does equal wisdom because you gain wisdom through experience most often. But hopefully wisdom and age can and do go together. But that doesn't mean that we have to give up fun. Even childlike fun. Doesn't mean we actually have to give it up, even in being wise. Wisdom and fun, I think, should go hand in hand. Case in point would be Solomon, as well as a whole bunch of other people in the Bible. But we're going to look at King Solomon today. If everybody wants to turn your Bibles to 1 Kings 3, if you don't have your Bible, it will be up there behind me, just like that. That's my wife running it. She's really good. All right, 1 Kings 3. We're starting at verse 4. It says, "The king went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, for that was the most important high place. And Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream, and God said, 'Ask for whatever you want me to give you.'" Okay, let's just stop there for a moment. Solomon is going crazy with his offerings. He's like giving as much praise to God as he can. He's basically celebrating God and all that he's done just because he can. God hasn't at this point actually done anything significant that we know of in his life. It doesn't appear that Solomon's asking for anything. He's just praising God because he can. He's like, he would go before God. And this isn't the first time that it's recorded that he's sacrificing. This isn't the last time. He's just a really thankful guy. He's like, God, you are great. Like that song that we just last sung there, God is so good. He was so thankful. Solomon, at this point, he was preparing to build the first temple to God. His dad, King David, had it on his heart that he was going to build God a temple. David's premise to that was that David had a large home, not necessarily a castle, but a large home, and that God just had a tent. And he felt that was wrong, and so he went to the prophet Samuel and said, "Hey, Samuel, do I have God's blessing on this?" Samuel says, "Yes." Then Samuel gets a dream, and God says, "Hey, no, David's not the one to do this." Essentially, David is called to something different. All right? That's the nutshell version. So then David, because this is still, when David and Samuel, because this actually is a good desire, a good dream, they're like, all right, but your son Solomon, he will be able to do this. And so David starts preparations on getting materials and stuff so that his son will be able to build a temple. And then Solomon kind of takes up that mantle. He didn't have to, okay? Solomon could have just went, all right, well, we got all this stuff here. We got lots of money collected for this. We got resources. This can be put to better use than a temple. We could put it into our economy better. We could, whatever. He could have done all those things, but no. He's like, no, I'm gonna do this temple. I'm gonna make this even bigger and better than David, my dad, ever could have imagined. And so he's working on the preparation for this just because he could. Solomon ends up building it, and it took, honestly, a crazy, read the story later on, took a crazy amount of wealth. And he did it simply because he loved God. And here in our passage, we see that again. He just sacrificed 1,000 animals because he loved God. And I'm not saying that we should sacrifice animals, but I think that we should do things just because we are thankful, just because we love him. Whether that's buying someone a coffee or a sandwich when they look a little down and out, or we should be praying just because we're thankful. We should be going to church just because we're thankful. I get to go celebrate God. Help someone out, even if it's inconvenient, just because you're thankful to God. Like sometimes I think we lose sight because Jesus sacrificed so that there was a remote hope for us. He literally sacrificed his life so that you could be free from your sin, your shame, and from hell. He sacrificed so that there was a hope that you could enter into eternity with him instead of without him. Sometimes I think we lose sight of the scale of that. If that's not enough for you to do, think, and say things because you're thankful to him, I actually don't think that God could do anything in your life that would make you thankful. He could do all of the miracles and all of the healings and have people giving you direct words from God and like whatever. He could do all of that. And I actually don't think that you would be thankful if you're not just thankful for his sacrifice. Because all of those things are temporary. All of those things, there's a beginning and an end. Someone gets healed. Okay, Lazarus in the Bible dies. Jesus comes days later, raises him from the dead. Awesome, crazy, amazing story. But he ends up dying again. It's temporary. Even that resurrecting from the dead, it was temporary. But Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, creating a way for us to enter into eternity with God, that's eternal. Biggest, largest, hugest sacrifice that he could have ever done. The biggest thing, biggest miracle that he could have ever done. And if we're not thankful for that, I don't see us as being a thankful people. All that to say, be thankful. Solomon was thankful. If there's two things that he did in excess, it was sacrifice to God and marry women. We're just going to focus on the first one, the sacrificing to God. He married a lot of women. So Solomon sacrifices to God. We see that he goes to a lot of high places to do this. And high places are an interesting thing in the Israeli nation. Sometimes God blesses the high places and the sacrifices done at the high places. Samuel the prophet with God's blessing, blessed a lot of the sacrifices at high places. But then at other points in the Old Testament, people would sacrifice at high places, and God would say it was detestable. He would actually reject it. He would say, don't go to the high places. I'm not there. I'm rejecting your offering. And so it seems like a mixed message there, but the truth is that these high places they were altars built to give sacrifices to God, and whether God was happy with that or not was based on the people's hearts and if they were following him outside of that altar. If they were living completely separate from him, worshiping other gods, living a self-serving life, and then going to the altar and trying to make it right by sacrificing, he's like, no, I'm not there. I reject that. That's detestable. But if they would go to those places and they've been living in celebration of God, thankful to God this whole time, and living for him, then they go to the high place and they sacrifice. He's like, that's sweet-smelling incense to me. That's wonderful. Thank you. I love you. And so Solomon, he goes to these places and he's doing big sacrifices, seemingly not in response to anything that God in particular did, but just because he could, because he loved God. And God, not because he had to, but because he wanted to, responded to him in a dream. So we're going to continue on in our passage here, verse 6. Solomon answered, "You have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in your heart. You have continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of made your servant king in place of my father David. But I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, since you have asked for this and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have you asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. If you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as David your father did, I will give you a long life. Then Solomon awoke, and he realized that it had been a dream. He returned to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant, and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then he gave a feast for all his court. How many of us would love more wisdom? Absolutely. I sure would. How many times have you thought, if I could go back to blank and change what I did, all of us, every one of us has those moments. And if we don't, then we don't have a lot of self-reflection. So in 2002, I was only 12 years old, but in 2002, Google was still kind of a startup company. Yahoo and MSN and stuff like that were the big search engines. Google was kind of a startup company. They were shaking things up. And my dad was like, he would swear by Yahoo. He was like, this is the best search engine out there. And I looked at him and I was like, Google will one day rule the internet. I think that's ridiculous. 2004 is when Google went public on the stock market at $85 a share. Since then, they've had two stock splits, and each of those stocks are worth $1,540. If I had gone back to when I was 12 years old, bought a few stocks, spent all my life savings of $100 on a stock, I could have been rich. Okay, one stock wouldn't have made it. Okay. Things could have been different. More recently, I went on a winter camping trip with a few buddies up north near Quesnel, and we did this last year too. It went great last year. This year though, so we brought an extra person, and we used the same tent, so it was a bit more crammed, and like minus 20 kind of thing. It was quite crammed in this tent, and in the back of my mind, I kind of like, you know how at night in a tent, the walls of it get damp, moist? Speaking moistly. No, sorry. So the walls of a tent get damp at night and stuff like that. And in the back of my head, I knew that me sleeping on the edge, I was probably going to have some of that moisture soak into my sleeping bag. I decided it was going to be okay, I could bear it out. About 4 a.m., I wake up and my feet are frozen. I touch the edge of my sleeping bag and it's the whole bottom third of it is soaking wet, very cold. I can't feel my feet. I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'm gonna have to take care of that in the morning. And so we wake up in the morning and I'm sitting by the fire. I can't feel my feet. And as my feet start to heat up from the fire, all of a sudden they're on fire, like they're burning hot. I shove my boots into the snow, melt all the snow around, it was bad. I eventually took off my boot and realized that my big toe had frostbite. And me still not learning from what I'm doing, I decided that going and checking in with the doctor was not my best path. So I just kind of wrote it out, and then my toe got infected. And I kept writing it out, and it got more infected, and it was starting to look really gross. And then I finally went to the doctor. He's like, yeah, that's really infected. We're going to do this, whatever. And part of my toe kind of fell off, And so now there's a funny slant on it, and if I touch my toe to anything, it's just like I crumble because it hurts so much. And that's where I'm at. But if I had changed, if I could have gone back, had a little bit more wisdom in that moment, how different could things have been? I think all of us do have those stories where it's like, if I just changed a little bit of what I did, things could have gone so much better. So God grants Solomon wisdom, and God points out how wise that was, saying that he could have asked for so many other things, but wisdom was greater. And what's Solomon's response? He goes and sacrifices things, giving praise to God, and then he calls all the people around him, and he throws a party. I think that's cool. It says he calls his court and has a feast with them. He parties. He's like, Jesus, talk to me. This is great. God is so good. I'm going to throw a party. And I think that's the coolest response ever. What if that was our response when someone finds Jesus or talks about Jesus, or we meet another Christian, or God talks to us, or God does something in your life? What if our response was like, all right, who's the closest people I can call to my house? Because we got to have some kind of party. We got to have some fun. What if that was our response? Like, I just want to collect people together so I can tell them what happened and tell them that Jesus did this. And we're going to celebrate it. I think that would be the coolest response. And I think that sometimes we miss that a little bit. We don't maybe celebrate the way I think we're supposed to. My family, when I was a teenager, we would go to Mexico every 2 years or so, just for vacation. And we would always visit a church. And the first time that we went to this church, and a very small church, very small band, but the life in those churches. Honestly, so I can't dance. We didn't have dancing at my wedding. I can't even clap on time. I can't dance. And it's like one of those moments in those churches, just because of the life coming from everybody, where you're like, oh, I'm moving. Whoa. Oh, no, it happened again. Like, that kind of life, that kind of celebration is infectious. And I think we're actually called to that. I see Solomon's response. Now, we might think, oh, well, that wasn't the wisest thing for him to do. He could have gone out and done so many other things. But he was just given that wisdom, so it must have been wise. At least that's my theory. I think that if we started celebrating like that every time God did anything in our lives, that our neighbors would become curious. They'd be like, why are they always having people over for a barbecue? Why are they always going crazy, laughing and joking? And what? They don't even need alcohol to do that? I don't get it. I think our neighbors would be super curious. They would be drawn to that celebration, to that life, to that excitement. And they would go, hey, that Christianity thing, there's joy. There's an immense joy there. In 1 Kings 10, 24 and 25, it says, the whole world sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom God had put in his heart. So this is godly wisdom. He wasn't just given man's wisdom. Year after year, everyone who came brought a gift, articles of silver and gold, robes, weapons, and spices, and horses and mules. Solomon's neighbors saw who he was, what God did in his life, and how he responds to it. And they're curious. People traveled to see this, to just gain a little bit of what's going on over there. That was the neighbors' responses. And for the first and only time in all of Israel's history, with this wisdom, Solomon produced the only time of peace in Israel's history. I don't promise gold and riches when you do God's will. I don't. When you follow his wisdom, when you do his will, I don't promise gold and riches. I don't promise anything like that. But what I can promise is fulfillment. When you trust God's will, trusting in his wisdom, you will feel fulfillment. I think that's something that we, especially in first world nations, have a really hard time with. We don't understand being fulfilled and content regardless of the stage we're in. We're always looking for, we even value this in our society, of someone that always has a plan and they're moving forward and they need to have a little bit bigger, a little bit better, a little bit more. We value it. And it's not wrong to have those plans. But if you don't feel fulfilled and that's your drive for it, I think that's actually a problem. You're not finding, God promises peace and fulfillment and the feeling of being content regardless of your scenario. And so I think that we have this problem with being content. We're like, okay, there's got to be another step. There's got to be another this. If I just had this, if this just happened, then I would be content. And when we think that way, there's always one more thing. There's always two more things. There's always three more things. And especially when you look at celebrity pop culture, how many celebrities that have made it are depressed and or suicidal? How many? They've made it. All of everybody else goes, wow, that seems like the perfect life. I would have all the money I could ever want. I have fame and fortune. I get to go on all these talk shows, meet all the people that I idolize. And they're going, I am the most miserable person. I cannot find happiness. Jesus says there's a better way. He says you can have hopes and dreams, but finding your inner fulfillment and peace comes from Him. And then no matter the circumstance you're in, life is a party. Life is exciting. There's things to celebrate no matter the circumstance. Every Christian can have that joy which causes us to celebrate. We don't celebrate because we're forced to. We celebrate because we can find that joy in what He did. But even as Christians, we can lose sight of that joy. We can, at one time or another, we seem to lose sight of it sometimes, and we don't have that inner peace. We don't have that inner joy. And I can tell you, I have a solution for that, which is really, people like solutions, right? Yeah, we like solutions, especially when it's like a 1, 2, 3 step solution, and we're like, all right, at the end of these steps, it's going to be all good. I like those. My first step is to give up. Give up your sin and selfishness. Be willing to give up your plans if God calls you to something different or God knocks you off your plan. Give up, and I promise it will be better. His plan is always better than ours. Even if you can't see it, and even if you never see it, His plan is always better than ours. The second step, that's a really easy first step, right? Except for the part where we have to give up. The second step is pursue God. It will cause you to fall in love with Him. Sometimes I don't think we do this well. Pursuing God, not to get something out of it, but because you love Him so much for what He did and who He is. That's what Solomon did. He looked for ways to celebrate God just because God. And so he would go and he would sacrifice and he would throw these feasts and parties in God's honor just to worship Him just a little bit more, just a little bit better, because honestly, He did so much for us that we could never worship Him enough. There's no point where it's like, yeah, no. All right, He's got to do a little bit more so that I worship Him more. No, that doesn't exist. And so we pursue God. And the basics when it comes to pursuing God are doing your devotional time. So reading His Word, asking Him, what are you trying to say to me through your Word right now? What does this mean? Even sometimes doing more in-depth study in His Word. Seeing all the layers that we wouldn't otherwise understand without study. All those things. Pursuing Him just because you want to know more about this person who loved you so much that He gave His life for you. Just because you want to know that guy more. Second is prayer. When we pray, do we pray because we are excited for God? Excited to talk to Him? Or do we pray because we have a list of things that we want? It's not wrong to ask for things. But what's your motivation behind most of your prayer? I think if most of our prayer is, God, fix this, God, do this, God, help this, and it's not just, God, you're amazing. I thank you for everything. Speak to me. I think the balance of that, if most of our prayer is asking God for things, then we're treating him more as a genie or a vending machine than God. Talking to others about Jesus is actually part of pursuing God. When a young person is infatuated with another young person, when back in the time when people were single and all that, you're infatuated with another person, you work them into the conversation. You work them into the conversation just as like a blip of like, oh, so-and-so likes this too. Things like that. They're on your mind, and so they're in your conversation. It happens. And I think that kind of infatuation, if we have that toward God, we are naturally going to talk to others about him. And I have a problem when people haven't talked to other people about God in a long time, because I think that it means that we've lost the infatuation side of loving him. Okay, so we have give up, we got pursue God. Third is when you're doing all of these things, it's amazing how what he calls you to beyond that becomes apparent. Do what he calls you to. Like party for him. Do what he calls you to. So you do these basic minimum things, and then doing what he calls you to is basically when something tugs at your heart, or you see an opportunity to serve him, or if he actually speaks directly to you, follow that. Regardless of what it means for you, follow that. Make sure it lines up with the Bible, of course, but follow it. Do these and you will find joy and peace in life. You'll find them in Jesus. Not in a dream of a life you think you can attain. The whole American dream thing. That won't give you peace. Sometimes I think, oh, Taylor and I, we could move out to a cabin by a lake, and we could just live out there, and it'd be awesome. Could fish all day, it'd be wonderful. Truth is, sure, that might be peaceful, but it's not going to give me peace. It might be restful, but eventually that's going to get old because it's not what I'm called to. Eventually it just falls apart. That joy and peace in life in Jesus, it will cause you to party like Solomon. His response was to throw a feast with the people around him. And then right after that, we get a story of him exhibiting that godly wisdom. And people hear about it, and they want to come, and they want to be part of this, honestly, miracle that has happened. Solomon didn't wait until he had made it. We hadn't even actually seen him do anything with godly wisdom before he gave a feast. Honestly, it could have just been a dream. He may have just eaten something funny the night before, and it caused him to have weird dreams, and he dreamed about God. Could have been that way. He hadn't tested it yet. Didn't know if he had actually got wisdom from God, but he believed he did, and so he celebrated it. He didn't wait until he had made it. He started celebrating God right away. With that, when you celebrate, when you party for God, and I really, honestly, when's the last time you just had that? When's the last time we just did that? That's amazing. But do people know you because of the things you're against and abstain from? Or do they know you because of the life you find in Jesus? Which attribute would especially non-Christians associate with you? If it's the things that you're against and things that you're abstaining from because you're a Christian, honestly, that doesn't sound very life-giving. I'm not saying that those things are wrong. I'm saying, what do they know you for? Do they see the life side of it? Do they see the celebratory side? Do they see the joy and the peace I would rather be known for the things that I am for, like Jesus and celebrating and peace, and for the fun and excitement that accompanies all of that. That's what I would rather be known for. I'm going to call up the worship team.